Aloha and welcome to the fifth and final WOD for the Dynamic Web App module. We've come a long way from the beginning, and we're going to finish off by actually doing something pretty nifty, which is creating almost a CRUD application. And CRUD is kind of the classic, database application functionality. You want to be able to create, read, update, and delete. Turns out we've already done the create, we've already done the read. And in this module, we're going to add update, which is, takes a little bit of doing. We won't do delete. Delete is pretty trivial, actually, after we've done these things. But we're going to do update in this one. And I want to highlight that I made a little video that you should watch, and maybe watch a couple times till you really understand the idea. You grok the concept of how we do updates and how, in particular, we use an ID field to help us know whether or not we're doing something for the first time, whether we're doing creation or whether we're doing an update event. And so what this means from the user interface perspective is that now, after we've created our first contact using the new contract form, the table that displays contacts will not only have the data, which is the kind of the read aspect, but it will also have a link that enables you to edit that particular, it signifies that you want to edit that specific entry. And when you click that edit link, you're going to go to a page that actually displays the data from the table, the pre-existing data, and you can modify that data in any way you want. So let's, for example, maybe we wanted to say Joseph rather than Joe for Smith. Okay, if we do that and click add, and then go back to the home page, what we'll see is that we've actually still only have one entry in our database. So we've edited in place, we've updated that previous entry that said Joe Smith to be Joseph Smith. Okay? If you don't do it quite right, what you'll discover when you go here is that you've got two entries, one for Joe Smith and a new one for Joseph Smith, and that indicates a bug. Okay? So this is the essence of the update operation. So to get ready for this, we've got to create a new branch, and I apologize, this has just gotten so out of hand, this naming convention. I'm gonna fix it in the next module, but for right now, we just kind of got to stick with it. So what I'm going to do is go back to my attempt 2222. Okay, so let me switch to this branch, and then in this branch, I'm going to create a new. Whoops. I'm going to create a new sub-branch called attempt 2-2-2-2, and then this is the second attempt at this because I had to generate the screen dumps. So I'll create that branch 2-2-2-2-2. That's just really bad. Sorry about that. And then I'm going to do a clean compile, whatever, Eclipse, and run, just to get my application state back to the initial way it should be. So I'll go here, I'll do a refresh just to make sure that looks okay, and now I can go to digits and type return. Okay, now back to the way the original state that I was before, at the end of the digits, whatever it was, the fourth one before this. Okay? Alright, so we're ready. Let's start the timer. See how we do for this. Enable check style. I don't know, check style might be activated already, but never hurts to do it again. We're going to support create, read, and update. We've already implemented create and read, so this was going to update. Follow the approach described in the WOD, or in the screencast. Okay? And so I have a little checklist of things to do, which kind of hopefully keeps you on the straight and narrow here. So we're going to start off by updating the contact and contact form data classes with a long ID value. So that would mean private long ID here. And when we create a new contact, I now want to have a long ID field, and then say this.id equals ID. And I probably want a way to get the ID value. So what I'm going to do is create the getter and setter. But I don't think I want to be able to set the ID in this object. So I'm actually going to get rid of that set ID method. And oh, this, okay, sorry, this dot ID. That's stupid. It's the silly auto generator the ID thing doesn't quite do it correct. Well, it wants to make, anyway, you'll understand if you do this yourself. You'll figure out why this is happening. Okay, so now we've created an ID field for the contact, and now contact form data. That also needs an ID field. So let's create one. Oops, that won't help. Public long ID. Okay. And let's see. So we've got the long ID field, and then the contact form data class needs a default no-arg constructor. And this is just a hint that default no-arg constructor. You'll figure out, if you forget to do this, Play is going to get a runtime error and tell you need to have this default no-arg constructor. And the reason why we have to do the no-arg is because we're about to implement a new constructor for this that takes a contact as its argument. And you'll see in a little bit why we actually need that. It's in order to basically do our editing, we need to be able to create form data that contains a pre-existing contact in order to do our editing. And so this is how we're going to get that thing. And it's very simple. We'll just say this.id equals ID, this.firstname, whoops, equals contact dot get ID, this.firstname equals contact dot get first name, last name equals contact dot get last name, and this dot telephone equals contact dot get telephone. Okay. You may be asking yourself why. Well, if you've been reading along in the book, you'll notice that they don't have this difference between a contact form data and a contact model instance. They put the two together, and it does save some typing, and it saves the requirement in this particular approach that we convert back and forth between the two. This is basically a conversion, constructor that basically takes a contact and produces the same thing as form data. So there's a little extra typing this way, but it does provide some extra flexibility in terms of as your model and your forms start to diverge in structure, okay, you won't even notice that with this particular approach in some sense, whereas in your other approach, when you've got the same class trying to do both at once, it starts to get just increasingly kind of mucky to do it. So a little extra typing at this point, but I don't know, I don't find it to be that big a deal. The default, at least for me, I guess because I don't mind typing, I prefer this approach. I think conceptually it's easier to understand once things get non-trivial. Okay, create a contact form data object based upon a contact. The contact. Okay, so that's our contact form data object in our default constructor. What else are we supposed to do? Okay, we've done that. So now we've got to update the contact DB class to use a map to store the contacts, and then provide a get contact method to retrieve a contact based upon its ID. Okay, so now we go in here, and we've noticed there's some errors here, which we're now going to fix. Okay, so the basic problem here is we were storing things as a list. Lists, of course, are ridiculous things to try to use for looking up things. It was only good when we were just basically iterating through and displaying them. So we want to get slightly more sophisticated here. Not a lot more sophisticated, just slightly more sophisticated. And we're going to make this a hash map, which is of IDs that map to the associated contact with that ID. And you know, that means it's going to be easy to look up what we need in the database when we do this get ID method, which is, you know, fast coming upon us. Okay, so there's our map. Okay, and what we need to do when we do an add contact, we need to either create a new contact and ID if the form's data ID's value is 0, or else update a pre-existing entry if it's non-zero. So what we're going to do is this should say form data. Well, what we want to do is say if form data dot ID equals 0, then we want to create, this means this is new data, and we want to figure out what the ID should be. So we'll say long ID equals, or even int ID, long ID equals the contacts dot size plus 1. Okay, and then we're going to say, actually, here's what we're going to do. We'll do it this way. We'll say contact, and then we'll say contact equals new contact with ID, and then form data dot first. I'm thinking there's got to be an easier way to do this. First name. And then form data dot last name. Form data dot, just keep going, Philip. Telephone. Okay. And then, oh, sorry, there's no getters and setters in the form data thing. Okay, so we got that, and then we're going to say contacts dot put with the ID and this contact object we've just created. So that's what happens when form data is ID is equal to 0. Else, if form data is not equal to 0, then we need to say contact. There's no reason I can't just do it. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, anyway, okay. Contact equals new contact with form data.id, form data.firstname, form data.last name, form data.telephone. Okay, and then contacts.put ID contact. And then return contact. Oh, shoots. Okay. Well, we'll have a little refactoring opportunity here. So I couldn't really see it. Form data dot put ID. Put form data dot ID contacts. data dot having a problem. Form data. Something is not. Oh, Jesus. Okay, just read the error message, Philip. Okay, and then this says we need a. Okay. All right. Let's do this better. I just can't stand the way this looks. So we're going to say long id val equals form data dot id equals 0. If that's the case, then it's equal to contacts dot size plus 1. Otherwise, the id val is going to be equal to form data dot id. Okay, so now that we've got that whoops, just make this like this. So now that we have our id val, we can say that contact is equal to a new contact with id val. Okay, and everything else is always going to be the same. Okay, and once that's true, then we just say contacts dot put id val and contact. All right, and then we get rid of all this junk, and then we return the contact. Okay, that's what the clean version of this method looks like. Okay, so what we really say is update the repo with a new contact if ID equals 0, or update a pre-existing contact if ID not equal to 0. That's essentially what we've just done. Okay, and then down here we still have an error because contacts is now a map. Well, we want to return the entries. So we could return that. But unfortunately, that's a not entry set dot values. Okay, but unfortunately that's a collection of the values, and we want a list. So the easiest way to get there is just to say new array list, passing it the this collection, and it's going to generate a list out of that and return it. So now we've got our contact DB and the ability to return a list of contacts when we just want to display them, and the ID value is going to be appropriate. Okay, so we've stored the data as a map. We've got this get contact. Oh, we need a get contact method. Okay, so that's easy. Public static get contact based upon ID, long ID. And so what I think, the way I'd like to do this is to say contact equals contacts dot get ID. Okay, now remember that's going to return the contact if the contact exists in the database, or null if it isn't. And so just as a kind of a make sure that things aren't crazy, because we should be only calling this method when we think there's actually a contact. And so just to prevent, at least to give us a heads up that things are bogus, let's say if contact equals null, then throw new runtime exception past a bogus ID. Okay, and and otherwise we'll just return contact, because that's what we're supposed to have. Public static, forgot the return value, contact, and then returns a contact instance associated with the past ID, the ID, the retrieved ID, and we can even say at throws runtime exception if the ID is not valid. Okay. Dumb thing. Let's just do it this, or throws a runtime exception. Well, I mean, we could just do it this way, which is really what it wants. It wants us to say throws runtime exception. And what is this? Redundant, Jesus. Okay. All right, so checks out what, okay, it actually does want us to do it, or throws a runtime. I think that's bogus. I really think that's bogus. I can't declare that because it's unchecked. Okay, so now we've got our getContactID method. And we updated the contact DB add contact to create a new contact and ID if the form's ID value is 0, or else update it pre-existing if it's not. So update the routes file here so that the get is going to take an ID : long or default to 0. Okay. And once we've done that, now we've got to go to our controller. And what we have to do in our controller is actually, in this get method, we now have to accept, where that came from, we have to accept a long ID, ID to retrieve, or create a new instance if ID is 0. Okay. Okay, and so what we're going to say is we're going to say that contact, first we've got to create this contact form data instance. We're going to call it data. And we're going to say is if ID equals 0, then we just want to create an empty instance. Otherwise, we want to create a new instance where we're going to use our constructor that we just created before, which takes a contact, and we're going to get that thing by looking up the contact in the database. See what I just did? So here's the ID. This is the ID of the contact that we assume that we want to deal with. If ID is 0, that means we just want the empty, a default blank instance of a contact form data. But if it's non-zero, then what we're going to do is we're going to look up the contact object that's in the contact DB, pass that into our contact form data, so that now our data is a contact form data with actually pre-existing data in it. And then the way that we pass that actually to play is we call the fill method. Get it? Phil, Philip Johnson, Phil. Get the fill. We call the fill method of the resulting, form blah blah blah. And so now we've got this form data which is got the data in it, and we render that. Okay. So that's what this right here shows you. Okay. So the next thing we have to do is go to our new contact Scala method. And in here what we're going to do is we're going to create a hidden field. Okay? And so that involves just saying input and type equals hidden. And then the thing that we want in there is the name, ID, and value. For this ID field. So we're just going to replace this with ID in all of these cases. Okay. So that looks pretty good. So now we've passed our ID value in. And then finally we have to update indexscala.html with a new field. So to make things easier, let's just add a little bit of so how does this work? href equals, if we say at routes dot application, and then we say the controller method that we're going to invoke, and then we say contact.getID, which is the ID associated with this particular contact. See, this is the cool thing, right? Now, this contact that we passed in has an ID, and we're going to put that right into the URL that we send with. Is there anything else? No. That when we click the edit, the ID gets sent along in the URL and then passed into the controller, and then all the good stuff happens at that point. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Okay, so now what we just have to do is see if it compiles. And it does, amazingly enough. So we've got an empty thing. We'll go to new contact. We'll say Jane Doe with this phone number. And we'll click add. Then we'll go to home. And there's Jane Doe. And then we'll edit, and it shows up. And we'll see if changing her to Dodo does the right thing. So we go back here. And in fact, it does. Okay, so it looks like it's amazing, not a single, runtime error, but we did manage to do our update. So let's go back to this, test our system, corrected our errors, commit the working code to our branch. So we go here, kind of look and see what there is. It all looks pretty good. So implemented the U in CRUD. Commit and sync. And I did that in 26 minutes. Kind of a long WOD, but hopefully when you're done, you're going to have a good sense for how to do updates, and that's, it's pretty useful.